Freddie, thank you very much for joining me for a coffee with the editor. This is an important program for the Railway Safety Regulator. And I think for my audience who may or may not have seen the last interview I did with you, perhaps you can just introduce them to who you are and the role that you play at the Railway Safety Regulator.
My name is Freddie Kgomari. I'm with the Railway Safety Regulator. I'm head of a department called Safety Management. I'm basically responsible for occurrence data reporting and then the analysis thereof, and then eventually, the production of the state of safety report and several other analysis reports that we produce out of the data that's coming from the industry. Responsible for the contact center as well. But moving on to the other unit is a unit that we call regulatory planning. Is basically responsible for developing and maintaining our regulatory tools. Those will be our determinations, our standards, our regulations, so on and so on. The development and maintenance of those regulatory tools. And also a unit that we call safety intervention planning. That's a bit internally focused, that unit. It looks at, this data from our occurrences. It looks at data from our permit assessments, and it tries to then understand where the gaps are in terms of where the risk areas are, what we're seeing from conformity, safety permit conformity assessments, the audits and inspections, occurrence data I mentioned earlier on. And then we try to get that all into this pot that then tells us where to go in terms of the risk areas, which operator do we need to see, and when we get to that operator, what should we be looking for, where are the risk areas. So that's safety intervention planning. And then we liaise obviously with our regions to tell them that this is the regional management now to say this is what the inspectorate should be looking at in terms of those audits and inspections. And into that melting pot, of course, occurrence investigation reports. We're looking at the findings and seeing where the risk areas are, where the gaps are. So that's the department in a summary.
There are some changes coming up. There's a big call to action for the industry to get involved, and this is essentially around the safety. It's a safety management system. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's a safety management system. This is central to what we do at the RSR.
There's this big call to industry. Why? Why are we wanting to make changes?
We are a collaborative, a safety authority or a regulator. We want to know what the industry is thinking about in terms of those regulations or the determinations that we issue eventually. It needs to reflect the best practice. It needs to reflect the views from the industry, from the operators. Hence the call for operators to also, partake in this review of the safety management system. Maybe let me go back to what this safety management system is. All operators are required before they undertake any part of railway operations. They must be in possession of a safety permit issued by the Railway Safety Regulator. And for that to happen, an operator would need to demonstrate through documentation, this safety management system documentation, that they are able to manage safety. So what it is a way of, it's defined as a formal framework for integrating safety in our day-to-day activities. The objective thereof is to ensure that we achieve our business objectives in a safe manner, that safety is not compromised in what we're doing. That's a safety management system basically. So that's what it is. It was published as a determination in 2018. It went through all the government processes, the socio-economic impact study that was done. So it has the same sort of standing as a regulation. So it's the law of the country. The regulation operators need to look into those requirements when applying for safety permits. Published in 2018, promulgated in 2018. After those government processes, now we're at a point where we're looking at, let's now look at the learnings. Let's take from the operators. There will be a survey that I'll talk about a bit later. There will be a survey that we are saying that let's get this feedback from operators. Let's see where it's working. Do we need to expand or do we need to collapse some issues? Let's look into that and see what best works for us. Obviously, it's a system that has its roots in the EU. At the moment, before it was a system through a safety management system standard, it was a system that was based on the Canadians and a bit of the Australians. So a hybrid model was developed through the standard, the SANS 3001 standard. Some people will be very aware of that one. And then later on in 2018, we then reviewed the standard and we thought, no, let's give this, requirements, let's elevate them to that determination or a regulation, if you want to. And these are the various learnings, and we took mostly from the EU, and then we can be happy about it because it, reflects the best, standard, if you want to, in terms of safety management in railways.
Have there been a lot of changes? Because I see that in the briefing document, it's noted that there have been changes in the South African rail context. So it's quite important that this becomes aligned. So outside of like the EU and everywhere else, what have been the fundamental changes here that have impacted or promoted the need for this to be readdressed?
Obviously, Flipper, we need to recognize the dynamic nature of railway operations, right? What was a gold standard in 2018 is no longer what it is. I mean, we talk about technologies that are being used. Things are operating just the natural dynamic nature of railways. Things are not what they were in 2018. So that goes with the said that things are not what they used to be. And we now know more. So that's that in terms of changes. Railways are not very static. They are not static. We have new technologies and so on. And we have new standards that we have developed. Those requirements need to be incorporated in this basic tool that we use to manage safety and that we use to assess the levels of compliance from the operator side. So those are the changes that have been that we have observed. But we've also observed from although we are not exactly taking the EU system as it is, we do not just adopt. We also adapt to what is fit for purpose in South Africa. So we've seen those changes and improvements as well. From that SMS win, we've seen some improvements, but most importantly, we want to there's some takeaways in terms of what we're doing in our safety permit assessments. They could possibly be improvements. There's possibly opportunities to streamline some of these requirements. It's basically about if you look at the SMS wheel, there will be 3 processes that we're looking at: processes for design, processes for implementation, and processes to manage operational activities. Right. So there is an opportunity to make some improvements to streamline some of those things, some of the requirements, because attached to those processes, there are about sub 44 sub elements, if you want to, requirements that we're looking at. So we need to look into whether those need to be streamlined, whether we need to add on, because obviously they will take from the experiences from the operators in applying or trying to comply with these requirements. And we have also safety permit assessors that could also contribute in terms of areas of improvements.
What is this review process going to entail?
A review of what's existing, obviously, that's where you need to start. And we need to talk to our operators to say, through this survey that I mentioned earlier on, we just need our operators to jump into that link to see how they can contribute in terms of that survey. And obviously, there will be a gap analysis looking into what is now current and best practice. There will be a gap analysis, and we'll look into what other operators are doing, what other safety authorities of safety or safety regulators are doing outside South Africa. And even within South Africa, a safety management system is not a new concept. We can even look at other safety regulators to look at what they're doing. Then there will be industry working groups that will need to be established, because we are not just going to pay lip service to this collaborative process. So we're going to be asking for operators to nominate people. If they have the capacity to nominate more than one person, then they are welcome to do so. But ideally we want to keep that streamlined and very efficient, that working group, so that we have a platform where we are able to collate inputs from the operators and the industry at large. We're not just going to be looking at the operators. The gap analysis I mentioned, and obviously there's going to be, through the RSR, we're going to be visiting the operators as well to what we call site visit, but really just to see whether in practice, whether the safety management system is fit for purpose. For example, if you talk about continuous risk assessment, Is it something that is possible in the railway environment? How that requirement needs to be reviewed so that operators are able to comply. There are going to be training sessions. In the end, this is going to be tabled, is going to be promulgated, is going to be issued for public comments, but throughout, at some point, we'll try to get some training sessions going in terms of what will be the new regulation. Obviously, with the government processes, there will be these socio-economic impact assessments. Those are the various platforms or processes that will ensue to make sure that this is indeed a collaborative process. All stakeholders are engaged for them to partake, and then we provide the necessary platforms. That will be the process that will soon follow.
Once the documentation is all done, so like the SMS is reviewed, and does it need to go through Parliament approval or need to be gazetted?
The actual document doesn't need to go through Parliament approval, but there's a sub-process, a presidency process that tries to look at this CS study, socio-economic impact assessment study, right? It looks at what we're proposing as a regulation, how it will impact other areas of the society, other regulatory or other laws of the country. It needs to be looked at holistically like that. There's a department in the presidency that looks at that. We make submissions to that department, and they're able to tell us whether to go ahead or not. But in the end, it will be the RSR. If we get a go ahead, then it will be the RSR that will be. We have the necessary powers provided for in our act to then publish these regulations or a determination.
You're making these changes right at the moment when South Africa is undergoing the process of open access and slots with Transnet. So how are you going to manage that process, knowing that there are new determinations coming through, but there are also new operators, and those determinations will not be aligned, essentially, because the one will happen before the
other? This is something that needs to be looked at very carefully. These new entrants, the train operating companies, they would then need to tell us, but do we need to comply with all these requirements? We only really just train operating companies. Is it necessary really for us to demonstrate to you that we are managing the safety? Do we need to comply with all these requirements? Can safety responsibility be shared? My initial answer is no. We would need to make sure that the new railway landscape is taken into account as we formulating these new requirements.
Well, I'm very excited. With a bit of luck, it'll have a positive impact in terms of safety and operations and the railway sector. And I trust that our neighboring countries will also be able to access this kind of world-class information and safety standards that they can roll out into their own operations.